We're going to do this a little bit different tonight. In past book clubs, it's all been a fireside chat, and I thought the book really lended itself to us going on an exploration together. And what we're going to do is we're going to have Susan narrate us as we navigate our way down to the bottom of the deep. So before we get started with that, though, Susan, I'm sure everyone would like to know, how does somebody who was born and raised largely landlocked end up spending her, big part of her professional life writing about the ocean?
That's a question I get a lot, and I wish I had like an epiphany that I could point to, but I just can't remember a memory that I had from being born where I wasn't completely obsessed by water. But as Greg said, I grew up outside of Toronto, so there were many lakes, but I came from a family of hockey players and ski racers, and one day I just declared that I wanted to swim competitively, and I think it was just my way of being able to spend multiple hours per day in the water. And the water to me is home. Land is where the problems happen, but in the water, I'm happy. And I can't say anything other than I think there are other people like me, including probably some in this room. I've met them. This book is dedicated to them, the aquatic tribe.
Well, what was interesting is when we were having conversations beforehand, there's a lot of San Franciscans here, and there are a lot of San Franciscans who are water people, and from different parts of that. So it was actually exciting for me to hear different people's stories and how they intersect with the book. Let's start at the surface. You don't spend a lot of time in the book at the surface, but the surface for essentially most of human history is what we thought of as the ocean. And I think most of us have heard the stat that 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, but that doesn't...
It undersells it.
Yeah, undersells it.
It undersells it. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, well, yes, that's true. The planet, if you look at it, the globe is covered about 70% by ocean, but if you think of the Earth as a three-dimensional habitat in which life lives, it's actually 98% ocean. And 95% of that is deep ocean. And so what do I mean by deep ocean? Science argues about this, but it's typically thought of as anything below 600 feet. And the deepest spot that we know of in the ocean is called the Challenger Deep, which is in the Mariana Trench. And that's almost 36,000 feet, so almost 11,000 meters. And I think it's really hard for us to wrap our head around what that means. Like everything we do, everywhere we live, everything we see is 2%. Like, I don't think we actually have the ability to grasp the vastness of the deep ocean. Yeah, the twilight zone is the uppermost layer of the deep ocean. So from 600 feet down to almost to 3,300 feet, or from 200 meters to 1,000 meters. And it seems like when you think of some of the other bands of the deep ocean are much bigger, but this one is really interesting because it's so dense with life. I think of the Twilight Zone as the Manhattan of the deep. It's just like this cosmopolis of blinking, flashing, glimmering, eat or be eaten kind of environment where there are actually more creatures in the Twilight Zone than there is in all the other regions of the ocean combined, so deep and shallow. And once you get down there into 600 feet and below, I always say if you see a creature and you know its name, it's probably from the sunshine layer of the ocean, the uppermost. And I'll say to people, has anybody ever heard of the elongated bristlemouth? And has anybody ever heard of the elongated bristlemouth? I mean, so usually if anybody has, it's a marine biologist. And the reason that's so crazy is because this is the most abundant vertebrate on Earth. This is the elongated bristlemouth. There are, by estimates, 100,000 bristlemouths for every one of us, and they all live in the Twilight Zone. And like 80% of the other creatures in the Twilight Zone, they use bioluminescence. And that's also unusual because on land, we don't have that many creatures that do it. We have fireflies, some fungi, some worms, but less than a couple dozen. In the Twilight Zone, everybody is blinking and flashing. And so you can see this, you see is the photophores, the light organs, and you see the big eyes, and in next slide as well, you'll see these creatures are, this is a viper fish. You see his light organs as well, and the lights around the eyes. This speaking in light, this language of light, of bioluminescence, it's a very important part of the ocean, and we don't speak a word of that language. But when you go down there into the twilight zone, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, like you're overwhelmed with these fireworks. So it's not this dark, spooky, empty void. It's kind of the opposite of that. And you see, like, everybody looks at these creatures and are like, these are the spooky deep sea fish, right? Like, aren't they a nightmare? This viper fish is like this long. They're really adorable. And he has his giant jail bar teeth, because once you're down there and you catch something, you don't want it to go. I mean, it's kind of an environment where there's no place to hide, there's no place to look specifically for prey, there's no holes to dig, like you have to take it when it comes. And so they're also adapted to this, and because of that, they're really unique.
So let's talk about no place to hide.
Yeah.
You and I were talking about this earlier, and I think in most people's experience of the ocean, there's a lot of life around things. You know, coral reef. You put a float, a oil rig out in the ocean, and the fish all congregate around the oil rig. But in the twilight zone, like, are they congregating on where land meets the twilight zone, or where the bottom meets the twilight zone, or it's just out there?
Kind of specifically not, because obviously there are places in the ocean where you get to 3,300 feet and the bottom is there, and there are animals down there, and I went to one of those places, but it's really a midwater environment. The deep, there's the uppermost layer, and there's the deepest layer, which we'll talk about later, which obviously there's ocean crust and seafloor down there, and at intermediate points along the way, you could have seafloor in any of these depths. But the twilight zone is really known for its sort of open waterness, and that's why they have the largest animal migration on Earth happens there every single day.
So talk about that, the Great Migration.
Yeah, so all of these creatures, they think there are trillions of creatures in the twilight zone. And that's, like, I did a bit of fact checking on that. I was like, would it not be hundreds of millions? And it's like, no. It's trillions and possibly a quadrillion maybe, which when you think about it is really mind-blowing. And the largest animal migration on the planet is every single night. About 50% of the creatures in the twilight zone go up hundreds of feet towards the surface into the sunlit waters where plankton has been created by photosynthesis, and energy has been created in this plankton. So they're basically eating carbon and swimming it back down. And so I always compare it to like having to climb Mount Everest for breakfast, to eat breakfast. And they do it every single night. And it's such an incredible migration that for a long time, the Navy thought that the seafloor was rising. And really what it was is just this wall of animals that ascends at night, eats carbon-based plankton and swims it back down. But by the daylight, under cover of night, to probably protect from predators. And what they're doing as they do that is taking carbon out of the upper atmosphere and swimming into the depths, where it then gets excreted and maybe falls into other depths and eventually down to the seafloor, where it can be locked up for millennia, or maybe that creature gets eaten by another one, anyway, it's a way to take out massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere. So they're doing this ecosystem service that is really helping us deal with excess fossil fuel emissions, and there's a reason why scientists are just racing to study this right now, because obviously it's probably not a shock to anybody that the fishing industry is like, wow, like quadrillion fish. But nobody really wants to eat an elongated bristlemouth. What they would do with that is grind it up into nutraceutical oils, pet food, various other products.
Fish food for
aquaculture, which is pretty stupid. But there's a reason why it hasn't really happened yet, because that would really screw us up if we started messing with the carbon cycle. And they estimate that every year these critters take out on their migration the equivalent of America's total annual emissions. So it's a major, major thing, and it's very hard to study because it's in the dark, it's always on the move. There is no physical landmark that you really can base anything off of. There's no horizon, there's no, yeah.
And it's so far down.
And it's also just completely moving all the time.
Right. And here?
Yeah, so also in the twilight zone are about 80% of all known jellyfish species in the ocean. So you see that nature was having a mushroom journey when she created jellyfish. They're just like, you just can't even believe the shapes and colors that they come in. And they're 500 million years old. So people talk about jellyfish like they're this simple creature. They don't have brain, they don't have blood, they don't have a heart. But you're doing something right if you've managed for 500 million years. Dinosaurs were 250 million years, so they're ancient and have all these bizarre capabilities. They can eat almost anything. They can swim faster than any other creature in the ocean. They can regrow parts of their bodies. Some species can age in reverse. So I think actually we have a lot to learn.
Can we learn to do that?
I hope somebody is studying this.
So the Twilight Zone is the first sort of zone we're stepping into where, for the most of human history, we knew nothing about it. When was the first time we went down, and talk a little bit about that, those explorers who opened that up for us? So
in 1930 was the first time humans went into the Twilight Zone, and it was a man named William Beebe and another man named Otis Barton, and they created this submersible called the bathysphere. And it was just basically a steel orb that would dangled over the side of a ship like a Christmas tree ornament. But if anything had ever happened to that cable, they would have been down at the bottom for good, right? Like nobody had ever been into this realm. There was no such thing as backup rescue capabilities or any kind of flotation. It was just this crazy thing, but they successfully dived there like about 10 times. And came back with basically William Beebe. They had a phone line into this sphere, would call up all these fish that he was seeing, and he was seeing, of course, all the crazy fish in the Twilight Zone, and maybe you could show the next one. So this is the Twilight Zone is just filled with crazy fish. And William Beebe's on the phone line. He was a natural historian, and he worked at the Bronx Zoo back in 1930, and he was also a really popular author. He had groupies, he had all this bevy of women around him. They had an island in the Bermuda. He was a real character. And so he basically was like, well, I'm seeing a 6-foot-long fish with lilac lighted, he was obsessed with bioluminescence and with the colors of like in the midwaters before you got to the darkness of the Twilight Zone. Obsessed with the blue. And when you go down, anybody who scuba dives knows that when you go down, the spectrum drops out. So it's first red drops out, then orange, then yellow, then green, then blue, then you've just got this pure violet wavelength. And when you're in a sub and you go down through that, it is trippy. It is like not any kind of quality of light that we see on Earth. And everybody talks about it in the submersible world, like it's a narcotic blue. And so Beebe was the first person to see that, and he was really good at describing stuff. So he's calling up the phone line with all these descriptions, and a lot of the rest of the 20th century was scientists saying he couldn't possibly have seen this or that, or because some of the descriptions were so fantastical. But then you see a creature like this. This is a barrel eye fish, and this picture was taken by Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And they would pull this fish up, it's from the Twilight Zone, and it just looked like a bag of goo. And they were like, well, this is a fish, but we don't really know much else. But then when they got ROVs that could photograph creatures, and they use red light so they don't scare them away, they were able to take a lot more footage and see what was actually happening. And you probably think the eyes on this fish are the little dots in the front. They're the green egg yolks inside the head. So this is a transparent head with the eyes sealed inside the head. And right now the barrel-eye fish is looking out of the top of his own head, but he can also rotate those eyes forward if that should suit his needs. And the reason that's kind of cool is because, again, it's this eat or be eaten kind of place. He's looking for prey, and it really is good to be able to look out of the top of his head, because even though we can't see any light in the Twilight Zone, the blue wavelength goes almost all the way down to the bottom of it. our eyes can't see it, but he can actually see silhouettes a little bit out of the top of his head. So there's just all these crazy adaptations with eyes, and this is one of the ones I love the most. So with BB though, in the 1930s, he was the first guy to go down, and then nobody else went down until 1960.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that was late 1950s, early 1960s when they were training for the first Mariana Trench tour.
Yeah.
But what I want to talk about here though is Triton, not the Trieste, but Triton submersible. So that is a Triton submersible.
This is a Triton submersible. Triton is submarines, which is based in Florida. I always describe it as the Apple of human-occupied vehicles. They do everything with like really innovative design, but also like to the highest standards of certification and safety and everything. And the sub that I was diving in on, this dive was owned by James Cameron, and this sub is owned by Ray Dalio. They have a group called Ocean X, which is a nonprofit initiative that enables media to film from these subs and also funds science. And the reason why it's so cool to go through the twilight zone in one of these Triton subs is because the sphere is plexiglass, and they can now take these plexiglass spheres down to almost 2,000 meters. And they're going for 4,000, and it's like floating in a bubble around all this incredible light show.
Through the
right,
layers of light.
Right. So like seeing the ocean that way is like you almost they have the plexiglass is super thick, but they have a way to formulate it so that it's crystalline. So you actually don't really know where the water ends and you begin. Like it's really something. And
these are cheap.
Yeah,
like
super cheap.
Right.
But individuals do own them. I mean, I think there are about 20 of them in the world, and some of them are on privately owned yachts.
So all of our friends who are billionaires and have their private yachts, right?
Yep. And Triton has created an entire market of like user-friendly subs. And I actually did get to pilot this one a little bit, and I wouldn't say it's that user-friendly, but the thing that's really important when you first start thinking about going into the deep as a human is that you need to be in a bubble in order to be kept at 1 atmosphere, right? Like even in the twilight zone, you're still under like huge pressures. But when you get all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it's 8,000 pounds per square inch. So like that is like something like 300 777s stacked on your head. And the sphere is the only shape, I probably don't need to tell this audience at all, but it's the only shape that distributes the pressure equally across the surface. So any sub that is not a sphere typically would not be going very deep because it can't withstand the pressure. So
in the book you talk about, speaking of the sphere, you talk about an egg going, how deep did the egg go?
Yeah, an egg went to the bottom of the ocean.
To the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
Yeah.
And it came up.
No, I don't think every egg managed, but one did.
All you need is one.
Yeah. I mean, because really, it's the important thing about the sphere is that it's perfect, and so that there is no spot where the ocean's gonna, like if you step on a tin can, you know what happens. But a sphere, if you compress it, it's just more of a sphere.
And this, one of the most, I think, interesting parts of the book was the story of this.
Yeah. So on that dive that was the previous slide, we got down to the bottom in the Bahamas and we were cruising around, and I was amazed because there were these limestone dunes that when we lit them up, it just looked like a white Sahara. And you just don't expect, I don't know what people think you're gonna see at the bottom of the ocean, or what I thought I was gonna see, like maybe some ooze, maybe some rocks. Instead, there's this like crazy landscape that's just magnificent. And because there was still some blue wavelength in the water, we turned on the sub's very powerful lights, and it was like being in a Caribbean swimming pool, It was just this cyan, glowing cyan color, and all these creatures were there. And on the way back up, the water was really, in the deep ocean, typically the water is very clear. And especially when you're at great depths, it's some of the clearest water in the world is right near the seafloor. And so on the way back up, the subs were ascending together, and the pilots said, okay, now we're going to give you a show. And they said, they turned off all the lights on the sub. They put a towel over the control panels. And the pilots said, okay, close your eyes, and we're going to count to 3, and on 3, open your eyes. And on 2, both subs simultaneously flashed their bright lights. And on 3, all the creatures in the water flashed back. And I can't tell you how much this slide does not do it justice. It's not a freeze frame type moment. You can't film it. It's just energy being released into the water, and you have to think of it as a kind of a communion, because we signaled them and they signaled back. And that's when you really see that the deep ocean is not space. It is not every square cubic meter, every cubic inch is just a matrix of life. And this is the womb of the earth. And you really get to see them when they light up. And then we just came up the water column doing it every 100 feet and just screaming with laughter, and like you just can't believe it.
That's now on my bucket list.
Yeah.
So now we're going to drop down to
Yeah.
Midnight Zone.
Yeah.
And I love this creature. And I was saying earlier, at the end of the summer, my youngest son wanted to watch all the Harry Potter movies. And if any of you have watched Harry Potter recently, the goblins on Harry Potter, that looks exactly like the goblins on Harry Potter.
Well, so yes, and the Midnight Zone is beneath another vast midwater realm. Most of it is under the high seas. There's not seafloor there, so 1,000 to 3,000 meters, pretty big area, but the density, there's still bioluminescence, but it's bigger, and the density thins out a little bit. But then there's a lot of little animals in the Twilight Zone. You start getting the big animals in the Midnight Zone, and a lot of the deep sea sharks that people are sort of surprised by. This is a goblin shark. He's pink. They're pretty rare, but there's a whole bunch of deep sea sharks that are just crazy, and you look at them and you're like, oh, you're a deep sea shark, because you really kind of look like a shark, but also like a real alien. Some of them have huge eyes. Some of them can live for 500 years. Some of them are really big. Some of them are really tiny. Some of them look prehistoric. They have 6 gills instead of 5. I mean, there's just this whole unknown shark world that goes into the Midnight Zone and the Twilight Zone.
And we were talking earlier about Beebe and Barton in the Twilight Zone. They got to the edge of the Midnight Zone, but it was Picard and Walsh.
Yeah.
So
they were the first ones, but they had a different kind of vehicle, and it had a sphere that was attached to what looked like the Hindenburg. And the Hindenburg part of it, the float, was filled with gasoline, and then they had a bunch of weights, and it was weighted negatively buoyant, so it would descend, and then they would drop the weights, and because of the gasoline in the float, they would just go back up. So they had little thrusters, but it was a giant vehicle. Like, it was bigger than the width of this room with the passenger sphere. They only had a viewport about this big, and Beebe and Barton had 2 viewports, probably a better view than the Trieste did. So the Trieste was really kind of an elevator, as was the bathysphere.
And so the first humans, first men that weren't sinking to the bottom, that went through this zone were what year?
1958 or 59. Yeah.
So 65, 66, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
So in the lifetime of some of the people in this room. And this is also, we're getting close to the zone of the Titanic.
Yep.
And I think it's, when John first brought up this book, one of the things that immediately came to mind was the Titan. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. So I knew about the Titan for a long time. I looked into diving in it in 2017 before it was built, because I was desperate to find a way to get into the deep ocean.
Does everyone know what the Titan was?
Ocean Gate?
Yeah, Ocean Gate. It's the one that went down to the Titanic. And
yeah, they were talking a really big game before they built the sub, and I was at the very beginning of my reporting and didn't know anything about subs yet, but I was learning. It took me about a week to figure out that this was a disaster in the making in 2018.
They hadn't even built the sub.
They hadn't built it. I then went to the Marine Technology Society meeting in 2018, where they wrote that letter, and listened to these people in this very small, close-knit, and very safety-obsessed world of human-occupied deep-sea submersibles, panicking about, like, how are we going to prevent this guy from doing this? This is a disaster. It's going to implode. So I had started a file, I, had sub-pilots telling me point blank, you must never, ever, ever consider going onto that sub. Every research ship that I went on, at some point during a dinner or something, scientists would go, can you believe they're doing that? Like, oh, we're hoping they're not going to do that. And so, it's so crazy that it was really hard for anybody to believe that it would happen. And when it imploded, that was what everybody had warned him for all those years was going to happen. But, and it was tragic, but it was so outside the realm of the world that I was in, because everything is certified. It would be like flying on a plane that somebody put together out of styrofoam in their backyard and the FAA never saw it. Like, that's what he was doing. So as risky as this environment seems, it's actually a very safe mode of travel as long as it's certified by the equivalent of the FAA. He just skipped every step and decided that the laws of physics wouldn't apply, and the ocean doesn't negotiate.
No, the ocean doesn't negotiate.
No.
This guy.
Yeah.
Everyone's seen one of these?
This is the poster child for scary deep sea fish.
Yeah. And this
actually, this is a gal. And you know how we know that? Because you can see her. The male is a floating little sack of sperm that eventually attaches to her body and is absorbed by her body once he's done his work. And he's like, so yeah, that's a female. But
I think you said earlier, I didn't realize this. We all have seen this in Finding Nemo. If you have little kids, everyone's seen this fish in Finding Nemo. But Finding Nemo misrepresented the fish.
Really?
Well, because you said he's this big.
Very little. Very little. You can put on a keychain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some that can be a little bit bigger, but you can also find them there's no scale ever in these pictures, so everybody thinks this is a nightmare, this is horrible.
He looks huge, right?
They're just adorable,
Lanternfish, right?
Yeah. And so another thing that you see a lot of in the Midnight Zone, you see these kind of UFO-like creatures, and they have different names. This happens to be a larvation. And the animal itself is like the little thing in the middle there, and what is outside is his mucus palus. That's what they're actually technically called. And this little animal spins this opulent mucus palus that then acts as a filter to be able to capture plankton, little bits of marine snow, and ingest it. And once the filter gets used enough, it's just discarded, and he builds a new palus. And when you're in the Midnight Zone, you see them everywhere, and they're so beautiful. They're like something you drew on I don't know if everybody remembers a spirograph. Like, they just look like they're so beautiful. And so this is a place. Often, we're talking about animals, but once you start getting into areas of seafloor, the largest geological features on Earth, and some of the most dramatic, are in the deep ocean. And there are hundreds of thousands of submarine volcanoes. There is one 40,000-mile long volcano that happens at the seam where tectonic plates pull apart and encircles the Earth. So there's just a lot happening. There are valleys greater than that could swallow Yosemite all over the place. There's just, everything's big. And one of the things that happens in these places where the tectonic plates are moving and shifting is that there's hydrothermal vents. So there are places where the seafloor pulls apart and these volcanic vents emerge. And these vents, you'll see them a little bit later, were scientifically jaw-dropping because we didn't think they could harbor any life. And they were only discovered in 1977. And not only did they have life, they had this really specific life that was not photosynthetic. So it was the very first time we had seen creatures that were alive that didn't rely on the sun to be alive. And instead, they were being nourished by the energy that comes from the Earth, the internal chemistry and energy from the mantle and below. And scientists were just like, life has more than one trick up her sleeve, and we just didn't know that. So these vents were really scientifically important, and everybody started thinking that life on Earth probably originated at one of these vents, but there were a few problems, and one of them was that they're very hot, they're volcanic. The other one is they're very acidic, and because they're all volcanic, they can be erupted on, and you would need some time for life to emerge. But then in 2000, they found this place. It's called Lost City, And you can see, I love this picture because first of all, I'm obsessed with this place. If you told me I had 2 weeks to live and I could go anywhere, it would be Lost City. And that's the Alvin, which is the America's research sub. These subs there's only a handful of them, and they're very expensive. And Alvin's a big machine. And I like this because it gives you a little bit of scale. Like that vent is about 250 feet tall. But what's really unusual about this place is that it's not volcanic. So these vents were happening when the seafloor cracked and the mantle got pushed up. And there was a chemical reaction that changed the mantle rock into a rock called serpentinite. And the byproduct of that is carbonate, just like giant stalactites in caves. But this wasn't hot, it wasn't volcanic. It had clear liquid coming out of it that was warm. And it had microbial life that was among the most ancient we've ever seen. And because it was carbonate, was like, I think it's at least 200,000 years old. And so all of a sudden, when they discovered this, everybody in the world wanted to come see this place. And to date, it's the only one of its kind that we know. It has all the ingredients to be the right kind of site for the origins of life. And they think that if we were to find life on any of the other ocean planets in our solar system, or ocean moons mostly, like Enceladus or Europa, which at this point I think the prevailing wisdom is it would be sort of amazing if we didn't find life because of events like this. And what happens is this place takes non-biological elements, carbon, hydrogen, turns it somehow into biological materials. So that abiotic to biotic shift happens in this kind of chemistry. So this to me was like, wow, like, why don't we know more about it? And so James Cameron, like every astrobiologist, every microbiologist has been out to this place, and they found first they thought there were no animals there at all, and then they realized, oh wow, all the animals are transparent, and they were all brand new species. And just everything about the place, I'm gonna come back to this place, because just for the moment, hold in your mind how extraordinary and one of a kind this particular place is. Although they think that when the Earth was very young, there were more of these kinds of sites because there was more mantle rock exposure to seawater.
And there could be more that just haven't been
And there are
discovered.
probably more, but we haven't explored the seafloor.
Right.
So, yeah. So now we've moved. Yeah. This is,
although this guy kind of goes between the two.
yeah, so now we're heading into the literal abyss.
Right.
The abyssal zone.
Right.
Yeah. Biggest ecosystem on Earth, 3,000 to 6,000 meters. And this is where you get lots of large animals. You have giant squid hangs out there. This squid, which is called the big fin squid, I just like him because he's spooky looking. His arms are 30 feet long. Everybody gets really excited when this squid comes along. He's the deepest squid, can go to almost 20,000 feet. And down in the abyssal zone is where you'll also find, sperm whales and giant squids battling. And 50% of the Earth is covered by abyssal depth waters. So at the base, the abyssal zone is also a great rolling plain with also like tons of volcanism on it. So the abyss is just a massive part of the Earth. In these environments, these vent environments, and on like millions of seamounts, and the seamounts are oases of life because the animals will sit up on the mount in the current, and they can capture particles going by. So you have massive deep sea coral reefs that are nothing like shallow water reefs. Some of them are tens of thousands of years old. Some of them look like they're made of gold. They're all hard. There's none of the soft corals that you find in photic reefs.
And this is a glass coral?
Yeah, and so these sponges are actually made of glass. They're called glass sponges, and they're the most ancient creatures on Earth. They are so wonky. This slide is a place called the Forest of the Weird off the coast of British Columbia, and engineers and are obsessed with glass sponges because their skeletons are fractals, and the glass can actually conduct energy and light with more efficiency than a fiber optic cable. And they're incredibly intricate. And did I mention that they're made of glass? And so, of course, with all the volcanism, there's other hydrothermal vents, and there are all these like crazy, each event has its own kind of biology, its own kind of chemistry. And these are, this is a vent in a really unique place called Guaymas Basin in the Gulf of California. And these, you see these red appendages, these are tube worms. They can be super long, and they happen at volcanic vents. And they are really strange animals. They're kind of like chemosynthetic prototypes. They were the first animal that people were like, what is that? They have these feathery gills. They can be like 10 feet tall. And the reason they're red is because it's blood. And what they're doing is they're eating the hydrothermal fluid through these plumes filled with blood, and then taking the toxic chemicals that come out of the hydrothermal vents, like hydrogen sulfide and methane and things that we couldn't survive on, and hosting microbes inside these tubes of their body so that they then convert them to energy that the worm can use. So they're a symbiotic, they're not just one animal, they're an aggregation, a symbiotic group of animals. Again, like a different scheme for life. And you can see the hydrothermal fluid coming out from underneath. And so this is a particularly hot type of vent, and called black smokers. Also only discovered them in 1979. Really interesting chemistry. Obviously hard to study because the material that's coming out, the vent fluid, is coming from beneath the ocean crust. It can be hot enough to melt lead, so you sidle up to it in a submersible with acrylic viewports. You really kind of have to be careful.
And there's life in there.
Yes, although not in this one. This one was a vent that we discovered only about a year ago, again in the Gulf of California. And it was so new and so hot that there were no animals on it. But mostly there are all kinds of animals crawling all over them. And you think, how can they possibly be in that environment? But they are. Life finds a way. And now we even know that there's life 2,000 meters beneath the seafloor. Microbial life, some of it hundreds of millions of years old.
And this takes us, we're going to talk a little bit about, and come around to this topic a little bit later, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. And everyone has probably heard of nodules, and here we see.
Have you heard of it? The nodule mining? Because a lot of audiences haven't. Yeah.
Tonight? It's the first time?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
okay.
from Pellets,
with the book, yeah. One of the great abyssal areas that's slated to be wiped out is the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. It's basically between Mexico and Hawaii all the way, about 2 million square miles, and it's been divvied up into various mine sites that are administered by the International Seabed Authority under the Law of the Sea, which the US didn't ratify, so we aren't part of that plan. But China has 5 mine sites. Each mine site is 30,000 square miles. Some private companies have gotten mine sites by teaming up with tiny little Pacific countries and kind of like riding them through the ISA in order to get access to these. But this isn't, Clarion-Clipperton Zone is this region, we don't know anything about it. Every time they go down there, they find like 93% of the specimens that come up are not just new species, but new family, new genera, like new branches on the tree of life. They're finding out now that it's got more biodiversity than a tropical rainforest. And so the mining idea is incredibly ill-conceived, at least at this moment. I think it always will be, but the latest science on the nodules are ancient. It takes them 1 million years to grow a millimeter. And they're not just lumps of metal, they're habitats for microorganisms, and they're created in part by microorganisms. And so they're also like untouched wilderness down there for like hundreds of millions of years. And we now find out that they're actually emitting a charge. They have cobalt, copper, nickel, and manganese. That's their entirety of their, maybe a few trace elements, but no rare earths, no nothing like that. the play for them is the nickel and cobalt, or was. But the thing is, we don't really need more nickel and cobalt. But so the reason why it's a particularly bad idea to disturb this area is because they just found out that the mining companies are always like, this is a car battery in a rock. This is a car battery in a rock, which is very
green.
simplistic.
This is green.
Yeah. It turns out that ironically, these things are actually little batteries, and they're emitting 1 volt of charge, and they're splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, so they are an oxygen source that comes up from the bottom. So just like photosynthesis and chemosynthesis, like we knew there was a top-down source, now we know there's a bottom-up. There's top-down oxygen and bottom-up oxygen, and maybe we shouldn't wreck that just yet. Because one of the big concerns about climate change is that warming water can't actually hold enough oxygen, and where there's no oxygen, mostly in the deep, there's no life, and even deep-sea creatures need it, mostly. Yeah.
It's, as we talked about this, unfortunately, this is one of the most embarrassing place for our world to intersect with your story. There's 2 companies, and this one I guess isn't really related. The metals company, and I say they're related to our world because they went public via a SPAC, and if SPACs became the hot thing in 2021. The second one is somehow our friends at Y Combinator backed a company called Impossible Metals in 2022. But for all I can research it, it's raised $500,000 in 2022, but it still seems to be there, so I don't know.
Well, they are working with the Cook Islands, and somehow Steve Jurvetson is also involved with the metals company. At least I believe that's true. None of these companies are going to make any money. They mostly don't understand the environment very well, and the regulatory and economic equation that goes into actually going to these depths and getting this stuff doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Impossible Metals' scheme is that they're going to have little artificially intelligent bots that will go down there and only pick up nodules that don't have creatures on them. But the thing is, most of the creatures are microscopic anyway. If you want to hear a deep sea scientist try to explain that there are going to be little individual mining tools down there. I mean, then maybe someday, but it's so hard to even get a big ROV that like 25 people are working on for an entire afternoon to work properly at 20,000 feet. And then it has 10 hours of maintenance when it comes up. Like the idea of deploying all these little things that are going to be selecting, I mean, it just, the only way it makes sense is if you pull up huge amounts of these nodules, and nobody has actually managed to do that. It's just so much easier to go to cobalt and nickel sources on land. But even if, in everything every like notion that this is somehow more ecologically friendly is just insane. This is beyond irresponsible because we don't know what's going down there, but all the biogeochemical cycles that keep the Earth in balance for life happen in the deep ocean. A lot of this is microbial, like 90% of the ocean's biomass is microbes. So another big tech business part of the deep ocean is bioprospecting. Because these microbes, there are also trillions of viruses in the deep ocean. So all of these bacteria are developing metabolisms and ways to fight off these viruses. Like they have a marine microbe that kills glioblastoma cells, completely dead, in 3rd stage clinical trials right now out of Scripps. And it takes forever for this to happen, but we have only barely started. So why would we rip up, because once we remove these nodules, they're never coming back, right? Like this is probably 60 million years old, this nodule, and we don't know how they're made, we don't know what their purpose is, and they're making oxygen. That's brand new science, it's not even in the book. We don't know how all this microbial life, we know that if we disturb it enough, it just stops. We don't know what it's doing, like it's the carbon sequestration, it's the nitrogen cycle, it's all this other stuff. Like we need to at least figure out what's happening and who lives there before we destroy it.
So we'll take a step from the abyssal zone and finish our voyage down to Hades.
Yeah.
And this is how we're gonna get there, right?
Yep, so the deepest part, so the abyss is the abyss, right? Super deep, super big. There is another deeper part of the ocean that happens where the tectonic plates collide, and one plate ends up being subducted beneath another, and you see what happens to my hands is there's a trench created. So if you think of the Himalayas and you flip them upside down, those are the Hadal trenches. And they go from 6,000 meters down to almost 11,000 meters. And 1960 was the first time humans went into the Hadal zone. And then James Cameron went again to the Challenger Deep in 2012 in a sub that he built. But that sub never dived again because it started to disintegrate on the bottom, and it never, go back if you would to the,
there we go.
Yeah.
So,
up to 2012, there had been 200 people to the International Space Station and 3 people to the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
2 trips, 3 people.
2 trips. And when I started reporting the Underworld, I heard about this guy from Texas who was building a full ocean depth sub for a passenger and pilot, and it turns out that it coincided with my reporting, and I immediately reached out and I was like, can I come with you guys? And they were like, sure, which happens every so often in nonfiction. You get very lucky. And Triton built this sub. It was fully certified. It turned out to be like this game changer. And the man whose name was Victor Vescovo, who funded all of this, it has its own mothership, really unique design. The sphere is at the bottom. So you climb through the hatch down a ladder, and then you sit in the sphere. It's 4-inch titanium. It's 5 feet in diameter. Cozy, but pretty amazing. It's like being in the inside of a spaceship. And over the course of 3 years, they dove into 17 Hadal trenches, and he took all the top Hadal scientists in the world down with him. He took one journalist down with him, and it was just an amazing thing to see this last frontier on Earth opened up, because these trenches are incredibly interesting for a number of reasons, just about every reason.
So it really is interesting, like two trips over 50 years, and then in 2019 he went down for the first time to the Mariana Trench. Since that time there have been 22 total trips to the Mariana Trench.
Yeah.
And all but one of those was on this boat.
That's up, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and he also went into trenches that nobody had ever been in before, humans had never been in before, like the Tonga Trench, which is only about like 10 feet deeper, shallower than the Mariana Trench, and very interesting because it's subducting faster than all the other trenches. So the trench is subduct at about 6 inches a year, and the Tonga Trench is about double that. So if you imagine a tectonic plate going through a paper shredder, and those trenches are where all the really big megathrust earthquakes that cause tsunamis happen. And it happens because these plates are going through and they slip. And when they slip, it's like the ocean gets kind of lifted up like you'd shake out a blanket. So any earthquake above 8 is happening in a Hadal Trench.
And I misspoke. The 19 dives, not 22. 22 total, 19 dives since 2019. The one that wasn't the limiting factor was a Chinese one, and we actually don't know how many times that's been done.
Right. So one of the things that Victor found when he went down to, Victor went down to the Challenger Deep 25 times and spent 15 times and spent a total of 24 hours on the deepest spot and mapped the whole thing with really high resolution sonar, took various people down with him. And on one of the trips, he found a bunch of fiber optic cable that had been recently cut. And he he's being a very interesting guy, also was a US Navy intelligence guy, and realized that there had been devices down there that have been cut recently. And the only country that has the assets that can do that is China. China's been all over the Mariana Trench. It's very close to Guam. It's likely that there's all kinds of listening devices planted in Hadal trenches, because now China has a sub that can go down there and ROVs, and the US does not. So that you can see the sphere a little bit better in that picture. Yeah, you can see the outline of it. So there's a pilot has a viewport, the passenger has a viewport, and then there's one kind of between your feet. And then everything else on it is just syntactic foam and battery pods, and it's just an incredible design, like magnificent, groundbreaking design, this sub.
And that's Victor.
Yeah, that's Victor.
And this,
Yeah.
so narrate this for us, because this is a nice little.
Yeah, so Victor also commissioned 3 full ocean depth landers that Triton built. So they're giant, they look like smart cars, but they're just filled with instruments, and they have cameras on them, and they can go down there also to full ocean depth and just film. So they would, anytime they got to a place they were going to dive, they would let these landers sit down there, and then once the sub was on the bottom, they would act as navigational beacons as well. But so this was amazing because they would put out bait and in the Hadal zone and see who came and film it. And once you start getting down into the 30,000 foot range, like there's still tons of life, but it becomes small, and it becomes kind of, there's no fish that can go below 30,000 feet.
So this is in the Hadal zone,
This is in the
below.
Hadal zone. This is called a cusk eel. This would have probably been at about 27,000 feet. And you can see this, so the cusk eel has a very gelatinous body. It's the biggest fish in the Hadal zone. Really tiny little pinhole eyes. So this big body, and it has a really tiny brain. So the brain-body ratio, technically it's the stupidest animal on Earth. It's also known as the robust ass fish. But if you're doing if you're like managing to survive in a realm where you have no predators, and like you're doing something right, and so you see this vacuum cleaner mouth, and what he's actually eating is not the bait on the lander, which is a mackerel, but these, see the prawn thing? Those are also Hadal animals called amphipods, and this happens to be, most amphipods are little cocktail peanuts that these animals eat, but this is a supergiant amphipod. So the amphipods range from this big to like this big. And again, that giantism that some animals use in the deep, nobody really knows why, but there's a supergiant amphipod, and that's what he's after. And another strategy that is like to withstand the pressure is to have like heavy duty armoring. So this is you can see the armoring, and the eyes are like inset, just like the viewports on the sub. This is a rat tail, which is a very common fish throughout the deep, and they can go down to about 21,000 feet. You just see them everywhere. This is the deepest fish in the ocean, and also my favorite animal in the ocean. Yeah, it's a Hadal snailfish. This is a Mariana snailfish, and you can see them, they're not eating the mackerel, they're eating amphipods. And they too have these suction mouths, and they have like an incredible adaptation. They're made of gel. They need the pressure to maintain their body shape, and they can go down to like 29,000 feet. So they are the gnarliest animal in the most hostile environment on Earth, and you can see them. They're like cute little gummy bears with these little button eyes, and you can see through them. They don't have any closed cavities in their body. They don't even have an enclosed skull. They don't have a swim bladder. Their bones are not brittle, so they can't break under the pressure. They're demineralized, so they have a floppy skeleton. And when you bring them to the surface, they just melt like jello. And they just look like they're having the time of their lives. And they eat amphipods, and if you're made of gel and you eat an amphipod, the first thing it's going to do is claw its way out of your head, because they're kind of like exoskeleton shrimp with claws. And so for purposes of that, the snailfish has a second mouth that's like a mill. So the amphipod comes in and then gets smashed, and then so it has 2 mouths. And you can see it's just like this fluttery little creature. And scientists, when they went down there, thought that first of all, they didn't think there was going to be anything robust, like a robust ash fish. Right. And they didn't think they were going to find fat, happy little snailfish cruising around everywhere. They thought it would be like these sort of starvelings down there. And these guys are fat and happy. And there's tons of amphipods.
And this is an adapted arthropod.
So on Victor's expeditions into these Hadal trenches, he also brought along the world's top Hadal scientists, and they caught a lot of specimens using the landers. And one of the things science do now is run genetic sequencing for these creatures, and it can be done pretty fast. So they found every time they go into the deep ocean and bring stuff up, it's new species. But this particular amphipod, when they sequenced it, was a little strange, and they had a bunch of them, and they realized that it actually wasn't fully organic, that it had plastic, nanoparticles of plastic embedded throughout its cells and in its internal organs. So it was like a hybrid plastic organic creature, and they couldn't find one that didn't have that. So they called this Erythenes plasticus. It's the first plastic, and it comes from the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So to the deepest depths of the ocean.
So man having its impact.
We're there.
Our impact all the way
Yeah.
down. Susan, thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank
and being
you.
part.